I'm originally from Ethiopia. I'm a journalist, a writer, and filmmaker. And I broadcast, a media known as New Perspective for the Ethiopian diaspora in Canada and in North America. Of course, we are not limited to North America because of social media. We reach even back in Africa, in Ethiopia, and elsewhere. I'm also the chair of the Writers in Exile of PEN Canada, and I'm a member of the PEN Canada board. And I do a lot of activism when it comes to freedom of expression, human rights, and I write and I produce documentaries about human rights as well. And yeah, I born and raised in Addis Ababa, in the capital of Ethiopia. I live with my wife. She's also a journalist and writer, and with our son in Toronto. Since I came to Canada, I'm focusing on the media works that I know since I graduated from university, and I'm still trying to maintain my journalism and advocacy. I grew up in a very oppressive political system in Ethiopia in the 70s after the overthrow of the monarchy led by Emperor Haile Selassie. The military junta took power, and there was a lot of chaos and massacre in Ethiopia because of ideology. I grew up in that atmosphere as a child. There is no freedom of expression, no free media, only one TV and radio channel in the country controlled by the government. I was trying to find a way to understand the world as a child. I grew up in a neighborhood called General Wingate neighborhood in the west end of Addis Ababa. That school was named after the British officer who helped Ethiopia get freedom from the fascist Italians who invaded Ethiopia in the 1930s. And General Wingate was a British officer. So once Ethiopia regained her freedom, Emperor Haile Selassie decided to establish a school named after this officer. So that school has a library, a British Council library. So they have all kinds of books. So I get a chance to read books, sneaking into the library because I was not allowed as a child to get into the library. But that opened up my eyes for literature, for journalism. And so when I was in elementary school, I a self-assigned reporter for the school. I report sport news and all kinds of information. HIV/AIDS was a pandemic in those days, and I information for the kids and for my friends at school. Through time, journalism my thing. When I joined high school, I started participating in the mini media at the school. Even in university, I was contributing articles to the newspapers in Addis Ababa, weekly newspapers and magazines. Finally, I'm a reporter in the city newspaper of Addis Ababa. So that was my first assignment as a journalist. But working in the city newspaper gives me the whole idea of what that government is doing on journalism and how the system is oppressing journalism and free expression. I established my own newspaper, but the system was not happy. So they cracked down and closed down my newspaper. I start another one. They also closed that down. I start another one and they also closed that down. Until I leave Ethiopia, many of my papers were shut down and my broadcasts were banned. So in the meantime, I and my friends were establish PEN Ethiopia, a chapter of PEN International, and we try to advocate about free expression and human rights in Ethiopia. So we worked for 3 years by helping to connect Ethiopian journalists and writers to the outside world because Ethiopia was closed to the rest of the world. So finally, the government closed down our center in 2014. In that same year, there was a PEN International Congress, annual Congress in Quebec City, and I and my colleagues were invited to participate in the Congress. And we came, and the whole General Assembly listened to our stories and the whole detail what's happening in our center and in our life. Our life was absolutely in danger. And finally, we decided to stay in Canada, and that opens my new chapter in this beautiful country. In Ethiopia, journalism and the media landscape has never been good at any time in history. And this current situation is the extension of the last operations that Ethiopian journalists have been suffering and have been gone through. So now is worse. We were hoping in 2018, when the new prime minister came to power, he was promising to do better in journalism and human rights, and he released many journalists from prison and many human rights activists from prison, and he allowed your outside to come to the country, and that was a glimmer of hope for many of us, but didn't last long. So he shuttered it down, and now it's total chaos, and many of our friends are suffering in prison, and many of them flee. And as you know, the 2 years created a very hostile situation in the country, not only between the Tigray forces and the central government, but also the relationship between Ethiopian society, the ethnic groups and religious groups. That is very difficult for the journalists to do their job properly, because the landscape in the country, not only in the country, even in the diaspora, is very divisive and very hostile. So you have to be careful to do journalism. So nowadays, proper journalism is not appreciated by many. As a journalist, a traditional and objective journalist I am, and my wife, we are trying to follow the books, and we are trying to advocate the truth, not to take sides and aggravate the chaotic situation in Ethiopia. But the situation in Ethiopia is getting worse and worse. Many journalists are flee from the country like never before, and the government has no interest to make the situation better. So it looks like a war situation. Because when the war stopped, another war is going on in the Amhara province. Until peace prevails, journalism is in danger. The government must change the rule for journalists, because they are not respecting the laws they write themselves. They are not abide by the law. So until the rule of law and justice is prevail in the country, journalism is always in danger in Ethiopia. That's my opinion. Mm, that's a very interesting question. Producing journalism in exile is both liberating and deeply challenging. On the one hand, it allows you a level of freedom that is often impossible in the repressive regime, but freedom to speak, freedom to critique, and freedom to difficult questions without any fear, it was not possible in Ethiopia, which we can do in Canada, where I am now. So I'm happy to be a free journalist. There is no one telling me to do this or that or to censor me. But at the same time, there is another kind of challenge we face as a newcomer. Our responsibility is multi layered. We have to serve the community that we are living in, and we are trying to create a bridge between the community that represents the Ethiopian diaspora and mainstream Canadian society, because we are living in a very diverse country. We have to be part of the mainstream culture. To do that, media plays a great role. So we are trying to create that bridge. At the same time, people who came to this country lately, don't have a chance to get the benefit of the Canadian system. So there are so many barriers. For the last 7 years, we have been publishing newspaper and broadcasting weekly radio show, and now we start TV series, but never get a chance to succeed any kind of funding or any kind of support from any source. So that is very difficult. I have friends, we are a member of the Ethnic Press and Media Council of Canada, and there are many media organizations representing different communities in different parts of the country, and they get different support. So I'm asking why our media is not, neglected, or, don't get a chance to get that support. To be honest, we are trying to sustain on our own by asking our community members to advertise or support us. But the media landscape is changing after the COVID pandemic. Many businesses are bankrupted, or they don't have the resources to advertise, or so even the mainstream medias are challenging to get advertisements. So this is the challenge that we face as a diaspora media outlet. At the same time, we are the voice for the voiceless back in Ethiopia. We receive a lot of information from Ethiopia, about human rights violations, about crimes committed by the government and other groups. We are receiving so many horrible stories every day because we are very much connected in the Ethiopian media landscape. We have to find a way to tell this story to the rest of the world. So we are not focusing on to tell this story to the Ethiopian community only. We have to diversify, and we have to tell the story to the rest of the Canadian society. But to do that, we need resources. We need to hire journalists. We need to, get equipments and other materials to tell the story. But that holds us not to do the job and to do what's expected from us the way we wanted. Yeah, for a long time, I was. Let me tell you first about our new platform, the OMNI channel. New Perspective, or Adiskenyit as we call it in Amharic, is a platform that starts as a monthly newspaper back in 2017 and evolves to radio. We did the radio on podcast, even we are doing it now. Finally, we get a chance to have a spot in the Omni channel. The Omni channel brings all kinds of non English and non French voices to the mainstream landscape. I was taking a bridging media course last year. At the end of the program, I was invited to the studio in downtown Toronto, and I visited the Omni studio, and I get a chance to speak with the studio administrator, and I asked. She told us, there is this language and that language, this community and that community. So I was Ethiopian programming the channel. She said we used, but now it's vacant. So if you are interested, you are welcome. She knows about my background. So I say, let me try. We are doing radio. I mean, television needs a lot of resource, as you know it. So it's not a cheap media. It's very expensive. But let me see. Let me talk to my team, and I will get back to you. I talked to my team members, my wife and other friends. My friends who were part of that bridging course have so many talents. Some of them are cameramen, some of them are editors. I discussed the idea with them. So they are, if you start, we can support you, they say. So I write the proposal and send it, and my proposal was approved after a few months. Then I organize the team, and with whatever camera, with whatever editing software we have, we start the demo and the first pilot project. Last February, we launched the show officially with the community members, with my Canadian friends, people from different walks of life. They joined me, they showed their support. Even James was there in PEN Canada, and JHR and all media organizations and people I know joined me, and they show me their support and shows me how important this platform is to connect the Ethiopian diaspora with the mainstream Canadian society. At the same time, to get a real representation in the media landscape. For the first time, we are now in the mainstream media landscape. We have that face, that look in the map of the media. I'm happy for that, and I thank all my friends and supporters who helped me to bring this dream a reality. And the question that you raised about what's the role of this kind of platforms to connect the diaspora, yeah, they play a great role, I believe, because marginalized communities like the Ethiopian community don't have faces in the mainstream media. And the mainstream media story, as you know, media always focusing on worthy. If the news has no worthy, according to the editorial policy of each media organization, they don't take it. That doesn't mean our story has no relevance. All stories has relevance, but what's story in Canada and what's story in Ethiopia is different. In this parameter, we are not part of the bigger picture in Canada. So we have to fill that gap either by establishing our own media or by creating a relationship with the mainstream media. So the mainstream media, for instance, for the last 2 3 years, covering the situation in Ethiopia when the war was very bad. But there are stories that the media neglected. There are stories that the media overlooked. The human rights issues, journalists' issues, women issues, children's issues. So all these are issues needs to get coverage. And when the story is covered, the media is always using the same source or one side of the story. The story, as you know, always has two sides. As a journalist, we have to balance it so that the society decided what the truth is. Otherwise, if you tell the story from one side only, that's not the. So we are trying to make a balance in this situation. And I was advocating for the mainstream medias to work with the community medias like us to get real information and a real story about countries elsewhere. For instance, if the mainstream media in Canada wants to have a story, they can connect the Ethiopian media like New Perspective. So we have friends or reporters back in Ethiopia, so we can provide the real source. So this kind of relationship will reduce the overlook of coverage in a certain society. This is our suggestion. I don't know whether the mainstream media consider this as a viable idea or not. I have no idea. But I believe we need to work hand in hand to bring a real societal change to build our democracy because we are now part of the Canadian democratic system. Of course, as you said, home is foreign land. Now we are talking about Ethiopia, the Ethiopian society, the situation in Ethiopia. But our proximity is to Canada. Our proximity is to cover stories in the diaspora, in the community that we are belonging. If we work hand in hand with the mainstream media or with any other media outlet, I think we can fill that gap. That's my opinion. If you care about truth and listen to voices in exile, they are the memory, the keepers, and the future builders.